What's next? Whatever it is, it's coming at us faster every day from every corner of the globe. What's next isn't where it used to be. It's everywhere else, and it's relentless. Some companies think what's next only happens through R&D or acquisitions. For them, what's next might be fatal. The most innovative companies are partnering with startups to do more with less, to hack problems, and to unlock growth. The most innovative companies turn to venture fuel to solve their corporate challenges with innovative solutions. Our global innovation network includes over 500 leading venture capitalists, universities, accelerators, and angel investors. Heck, even our scouts have scouts, which is why at any given time, we have eyes on up to 2 million vetted startups around the world. But you don't care about 2 million startups. You care about the ones that can solve your problem, which is why we don't give you lists. We deliver custom vetted solutions. So whether you want to transform innovation across your company, or solve an immediate challenge with tangible results, or simply discover what's possible, Venture Fuel helps you inject innovation to stay ahead of the pace of change. What's next? What's next is now.
Hey everyone, I'm Fred Schonberg. I'm the founder of Venture Fuel. Thank you so much for joining us today for our What's Next Now series. And this month's focus is on health and wellness. We have an all-star group of panelists and speakers that are joining us. So let me get after that. I will share my screen here so you can see what we have in store for you. It should be a great morning. It'll be an hour long. There's no industries that are moving quite as fast as health and wellness, from measuring our own biometrics to all the different innovations, startups and emerging technologies. These are two areas that are exploding. And so that's why we wanted to focus on them. We've got an all-star panel, or two panels actually, joining us today. And they're indicative of how we think about the future. What we like to do is get someone from the corporate side of things, in this case, a hospital from Mount Sinai with Dov, over to the venture capitalists who are thinking about the future, who's investing in the future, where are they investing? That's Tracy's role. And then some of the founders that are really helping to reshape what the future is going to look like. And you'll see that in our second panel today. I thought I'd level set a little bit. Who's Venture Fuel? Why are we doing this? And then get into a couple of ventures to watch, some exciting new startups, and then we'll dive right into the panel. So I launched the company, I mentioned 8 years ago, and the whole idea was this, that there were external innovation, startups, new technologies that were happening outside of the hospitals or outside of large groups. And venture capitalists and other investors were seeing them and helping to accelerate them. But what did that mean for the large companies? And the earlier stage companies were having a hard time, right, unlocking some of the benefits that the big companies had. So there was an opportunity for collaboration and this opportunity for all of us to do more with less by working together. When I say startups, I usually get two immediate sort of reactions. One is, oh, startups are too small to be significant. They don't have the scale to move the needle. The second is, oh my gosh, startups, they're disruptors. They're coming to eat our business. And the truth is there's something in between the two. And that is that startups can be the perfect collaborators and that large companies, startups, and investors together really can change the world when working together. And that's what our focus is at Venture Fuel. We work for some of the largest companies in the world, helping them innovate faster through collaboration with startups. You'll see several that are in the sort of health and wellness space here, Biogen Pharmaceuticals being one, to Cal, and obviously then AARP Foundation touches on a lot of what we'll talk about today as well. But really the goal is, how can we help your business stay in front of disruption? We have three sort of core products, all of which and services that meet you where you are. So a diagnostic, it seems appropriate as a word for today with health and wellness, but really it's about understanding how do you structure your business to sort of embrace these innovators and work collaboratively with them. Pilot excellence programs, how do you run lots of proof of concepts and pilots in an effective and repeatable manner? And then our accelerator, which is, do you want to co-develop with startups? Do you want to invest in these companies at an early stage? and how do we build out sort of this ecosystem so that you as a large company can have disruption insurance and future-proof your business. I think one of the things that is very unique about us, and this is the last slide on us, is that we're very collaborative. We bring in the angels and VCs and university labs to help identify what's coming next, but we always start with the larger organization. What are the tangible outcomes they want? And let's reverse engineer the process to make sure it works. And then we have a tremendous team, many of whom are behind the scenes today, providing us with all the information that we're going to go over. But we are independent. We work for the larger organization. We're industry agnostic. So we try and be sort of a very objective set of eyes in the room to help you make the right choices. So one of the things we like to do when we focus on an area is to look at ventures to watch, startups or emerging technologies in the area that we're focused in. So I've got a handful that I'm just going to rapid fire share with you. There's more depth on each of these on our social media channels. So if you follow Venture Fuel on LinkedIn or go to VF Insights on Twitter, really you can find us on any of the channels. We'll go into a little bit more depth on each of these, and a few of them are actually panelists on the back half today. But just to give you an idea, this sort of whet our appetite for what innovation looks like in health and wellness. Manatee is a fantastic emerging startup. The idea here is mental health therapy specifically for kids and families. So addressing a niche that hasn't been addressed in a manner in which they like to be addressed, right? We know sort of the ills of social media, but can sort of therapy using devices that the kids are familiar with and use every day actually be something that allow us to connect to our children as parents and also help kids through what are rather difficult times and things that you don't necessarily want to go into a doctor's office for. So really interesting emerging tech there. Kit, we have on the second panel today. I love this. This is the idea of health testing at home. I think this is something we all thought was impossible. And then as COVID kind of took hold, many of us are doing lots of tests at home. And Kit has found a way to make them as good as some of the more traditional ways this was being done. And obviously there's incredible benefit to that for many parties, which we'll learn more about today. Curio, very interesting. This is a digital therapeutics company that was made by women for women. So again, focusing on a niche that potentially, it's obviously a very big niche, but a focus area that has not been served by traditional means. So the idea here is how can you address things like postpartum and several other sort of areas throughout the journey, right, from all age groups. Vital Bio, super interesting, a new generation of tools to empower us in monitoring our own health. So if you think about all the different ways we're starting to track ourselves, this is sort of the next level of this. How do you manage a disease? How do you manage your health and well-being in new ways? So very, very hot up and coming company. Mightier, I think is super interesting. Essentially, the idea here is how do kids start to build sort of mental toughness, right? Emotional well-being, and can games help them do that? There's tremendous clinical research around this company and how they're helping kids sort of form better, I'll call it neural pathways, decision-making tools, and other areas there. And again, a fun way that meets them where they are. Med Rhythms, very interesting. This is around the idea of helping us walk, right? Closed loop gait training, if you will. But if you think of a stroke or something along those lines, how do you get your brain, your feet starting to work together? How do you get that training done in a way that is more effective and using music? And there's tremendous amounts of research and sort of trials around how music can help our brains function. And this is connecting both our feet and our minds through that. So super interesting. So enough from me. I'm super excited to start our first panel. today. So I'd love to bring Dav and Tracy on. So thank you both for joining us. And I thought rather than me go through and botch your backgrounds, I can let you introduce yourselves. And Tracy, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Fred. It's lovely to join you and Dov here. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm a partner at Investria Ventures. We're an early stage healthcare life science venture firm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we primarily focus in seed and A, and specifically our focus is in female founded ventures as well as ventures that address health of women. Perfect. And I came to this through a variety of steps, but more recently I was at Novartis leading both strategy and then global operations, and I've worked with both Novartis Digital Accelerator as well as the Gates Foundation in building out their innovation pipelines before joining Vestria.
I love it. I want to come back to that, your background and how you got here. And Dov, what about you?
Hi, Dov Shamir. I am the Senior Manager of Entrepreneurship, as well as I lead our Elemental Labs program out of the Mount Sinai Health System. I specifically work in the Mount Sinai Innovation Partners Group, that is the commercialization arm of the Mount Sinai Health System. We typically find ways to match and grow our internal technologies and find best paths to scaling and essentially transforming those technologies out of the institution, whether it be with an existing company or the creation of new startups. Elemental Labs is a relatively new effort on ways to strategically align external startups with that of the health system's strategic and healthcare plans.
I love this. So both of you started off your careers on the scientific side of the industry, and now one of you is running essentially an incubator. I know you're doing much more in that, Dov, but the others are venture capitalists. I'd love to understand how and why you sort of pivoted your careers. And Dov, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it was pretty much even before I did my PhD and I got heavily into academic sciences. It was somewhat predetermined. I was an econ major in undergrad, happened just, and again, by accident, end up doing PhD in research. I was fortunate enough to join a very, I'd say, expedient lab at the Sigurdsson lab out of NYU Langone. He is a pioneer in immunotherapies for Alzheimer's disease and neurodegenerative diseases. And I got, a lot of the work I was doing during that time actually ended up being licensed to a major European pharma company. So that was some initial work that I got good experience to see how things are translated, and really did start to put that, I would say, entrepreneurship or innovation bug in my head, that there could be more than just bench research. During that same time, during grad school, I ended up starting a company with a bunch of NYU Stern students, as well as creating my own technologies in the cardiac bioreactor space for drug development and for cardiac patches and transplants. So ultimately, did a brief, again, bench research wasn't really going to be it. Did a brief stint in consulting, very brief. And then fortunately for me, Mount Sinai was looking for someone with somewhat of a consulting advisement kind of background and with knowledge of how to bring, early stage, technologies through a major health system, which is, I had, that in spades. So, that was part of the bigger effort to start expanding their entrepreneurship offering. And Elemental Labs was a natural outgrowth of that entrepreneurship offering to how to service external startups that want to work with the health system.
I love it. And Tracy, I'd love to dive in with you a little bit. We've had a few venture capitalists that have started on the corporate side and really gotten into this and then seen the opportunity to move their skill set over. I would love to hear that journey and what made you pivot into the VC side of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll share with Dov too, right? I think it was one of those things that was a little bit always predetermined. Going back to undergrad days, I was a biomedical engineer at USC, and so it was incredibly multidisciplinary. So when I was doing material science research and orthotics, in one hand, I was also, doing my econ minor and thinking about the implications for, health policy and how do you get involved in healthcare at a broader level. When I went to medical school, I was at Stanford. And so in the middle of the valley in the early 2000s, that you really couldn't escape the entrepreneurship bug. So I was both working with the Stanford Office of Technology Licensing, evaluating and helping to think about commercialization pathways for early technologies, as well as working with the EIR at Sand Hill Road, BC, in biotech. And so I think that's really what started my thinking around how bridging that gap between amazing entrepreneurs building out these novel technologies, but also bridging that gap between getting them to the bedside to patients, right? And I saw that there was a huge need for that, but there was really, at that point, there wasn't a path to venture that was sort of right out of grad school. So, and the role and the opportunity was you go, you operate for, 20 years, and then you come and do VC. So I had somewhat of a shorter time frame than that. But I did a couple of years of M&A, healthcare banking in the city, and then I moved over to Novartis to be chief of staff to the president, leading strategy and then global operations, including product launch. But at that time, I met Linda, who's my partner at Avestria, and she was heading BD. And I think what really struck us as we were building out the innovation pipeline there, working with academics and early stage startups, as well as doing corporate M&A, was that there is this viewpoint of how do you really make a difference at that inflection point at the early stage to help them have those relevant conversations when the strategics are ready to partner with them and to take them on, right? Because I think there's a lot of network and a lot of expertise that we can sort of bring to the table to help folks, but it's really hard for early stage entrepreneurs unless they have that network themselves to move through those life cycle stages. And so Linda had some great exits as an angel. And then when she started Avestria, we were still in touch. And I think it just made so much sense for us to think about how do we fill this gap? How do we solve the problem that we'd seen ourselves, from the other side of the table? So it was really born out of, we feel there's a real opportunity to invest in overlooked founders who we also believe that there's a much more substantive, financial opportunity there too. And an opportunity to really do well and do good for patients who have also been overlooked. So that's what we're doing.
Love it. I think this is a little bit of an open-ended question. So take it where you would like to. What we wanted to get after is, how do you think about the transformation of healthcare by technology? One of the things that jumps to my mind right away, knowing where you guys have worked and what you're doing, is you're working in a field that has tremendous regulation. Obviously, we're dealing with people's health and well-being, so that regulation is crucial and important. But just trying to think what you think the future of healthcare is going to look like, and how are we going to get there? Dove, let's go with you first.
Yeah, the transformation of healthcare, I think it's going to start at the clinician level, and hopefully Tracy can, with your background in engineering and medical background, hopefully will appreciate this. What I have seen both from a personal level as well as professional level, a lot of the early innovation that happens with those who understand the clinical needs and clinical practice, as well as the modalities and technologies that are going to essentially execute that change. And one of the biggest things I foresee in the next handful of years, if it's already pretty much started, is you're going to see the clinical community picking up more multidisciplinary skill sets in their background, not just core clinical skill sets. And medical schools and others are really, I think, beginning to push this a little bit more than they used to, and ways of essentially extracting value out of existing systems. So as of right now, there's been a big digital transformation happening, I think, across the board through society, not just in healthcare. But there's still a ton of data out there that we haven't leveraged to optimize processes, create new solutions and therapies. And you really need the clinicians, the people who are intimately involved with the patient, as well as those technology types, start really extracting the value out of them. So I think it's going to happen at that level to begin with, and I think it's going to work its way up at the enterprise level as things go forward.
And Tracy, what do you think?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, right? I mean, I think healthcare is, obviously, as we all know, right, it's incredibly complex, right? And we have seen sort of in the early days of, digital health, where there are a lot of folks who are sort of trying to build a little bit of a shadow system outside of the traditional healthcare system, right? And that seems like a fairly reasonable approach if you're coming from outside, right? But I think having a real fundamental understanding of the stakeholders and how they interface in the healthcare system and how to navigate that is extremely valuable, both for early stage startups and to anybody looking to do business in this space. And clinicians and patients are absolutely, at the foundation of that, right? So folks who will be the ones who are successful are the ones who are going to be able to transform a little bit, not by coming in and disrupting from the outside and saying, we're just going to do it this way now, right? But the ones who are going to be able to really be very thoughtful about how they engage and taking that point of engagement and then being able to expand that further and further. So I think it's going to be much more incremental than you might see in a lot of other industries, right? But that's going to be the way to approach healthcare to do that successfully for the long term.
It's really interesting. We had a similar event focused on fintech and the shadow systems, right? The idea of like, oh, we're going to go build this and then we're going to force it on everybody. Sort of how that started too, and it didn't work for similar reasons. Lots of regulations, a lot of moving pieces, a lot of partners involved that have to be brought to the table. So it's really interesting seeing that transition has gone more to like, let's get involved and understand people that know where the pipes are and how you can move this and do it at scale. And it might feel incremental at first, but then when it works, you start to get that very disruptive scale, which is interesting. What are there trends or areas of technologies that you all are most excited about? As you said, the digitization of everything is happening so quickly. Where is your beacon right now? Are there things that are grabbing your attention or that you think people should be paying more attention to maybe than they are? Tracy, I'll start with you.
Well, I'll say yes, but I hesitate to call it a trend, right? But I will absolutely say that I think that, historically overlooked founders and people who are working in these spaces are absolutely something to watch, right? Because when you think about innovating in healthcare, and doing anything with data, it starts with the data, right? You have to have foundationally good data, and then you can generate better insights, and then you can get to improved outcomes. Without having the granularity, without having a really robust way to interrogate that data, you're not going to get to those success stories. So I think we really believe that it starts with that data. And then how do you think about data? Well, we're not a homogeneous population, right? So the people who are really going to be able to generate that robust data set are going to be the ones who are going to be able to move that forward in a successful manner, and to be really able to think about how we approach different populations in a successful way, and to add value there. So on a slightly more granular level, right, when we think about the folks who are really set up to succeed there, it's both, bringing lived experiences, but then also really thinking about what is their experience as well in, in industry, in the healthcare system. How do they bring those stakeholders to the table? How well versed are they in navigating that, right? And so I think that, having folks who are not just trying to have a technology that they're trying to find an application for, but who are really clear on the unmet need and have a very well thought out solution for that problem and how to get that there, so in essence, everything, right? But those are the people who we see as being sort of most exciting to back.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday about needs-based innovation, that it starts with some sort of problem or challenge rather than technology seeking out a place to go is an interesting way to approach this. Dove, what about you?
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue for how we, at least in our incubator program, really facilitate the matching of our champions or our clinical or investigator champions with that of the companies. It really comes down to what are the needs that the clinicians and the investigators are searching for. Some companies and solutions resonate more than others, but we're relatively technology agnostic and solution agnostic. So we don't have a theme every year per se on what we're looking to get involved in, but I would say that more broadly, we're looking for transformative technologies that not just marginally improve the condition of the patient or I would say the operations within a healthcare setting, but a sizable or more broadly improve the quality of care as a whole. Curio is a great example of that in terms of, they're able to scale the solution to for postpartum depression to women, beyond just the doors of a hospital. We have another portfolio company called Avomed, which took a relatively I would say, innocuous data set that many healthcare systems may have. They focus on perioperative decision support tools, specifically essentially protocols that clinicians use on a daily basis that are pretty much in analog form at this point. And they found a way to digitize that in a meaningful way and provide an interactive interface for physicians to share best-in-class practices with each other, whether it be a pandemic or otherwise, or for teaching purposes. So the more you can move that bar, and not just what you can do with the data, and not just an unmet need, but does it make a sizable impact on operations and patient care?
So our chats across the various platforms are blowing up, which is great. So everyone listening and watching, please feel free to drop questions in. We'll try and get them all answered. I'm actually going to pivot over and combine two questions into one. One essentially, Dove, was for you, which is how do you combat delays in government regulation to move quickly to innovate? And Tracy, the next question was, what are unique challenges to commercialization in this space? So I think they're actually very similar questions. One is how do you navigate regulation and government and health, right? And the other is like, how do you move quickly? So how do you balance those two? And Dove, I'll start with you there.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of regulation from the government, from a pharma perspective or device perspective, I mean, a lot of stuff's set in stone, as Tracy mentioned. It's a highly regulated industry. There's only so much you can move the needle. I think the best way is to essentially educate yourself as much as possible on the process. It never hurts to find a regulatory consultant as well. That's definitely something you probably should get, depending on what stage in development you're at, especially if you're going to be patient-facing sooner rather than later. And I think have your eye on the prize in terms of proof of concept and some clinical pilots. That IRB approval and I'd say get something that's an IRB approved study, I think is a major stepping stone for anyone who wants to get something in the clinic, especially from the therapeutic side or device side. So just know your environment, and I'd say educate yourself as much as possible before jumping in and developing your solution.
And Tracy, what about you? As a VC, you want them to move fast. You want to go grab the prize. How do you help them commercialize quicker?
Yeah, so I think, to Dove's point about educating yourself, that's so important, right? Working in a scientific field, we can't really do the move fast and break things approach, right? It's really, you've got to have fundamentals. And I'm going to keep going back to this, right? But that's really what we look for, right? Folks that have great fundamental technology, but then also understand how to build a product, understand what that fit with the market is going to be, and have done that research on it. And then also, how do you build a business around that, right? And what's your model, and how do you think about that? In addition to being the team that can execute on all these things. And those are really not easy pillars to be able to succeed in on all fronts. And so I think that when folks really show that they've done the work, that they're continually, they've got a robust strategy, but they're continually willing to take in feedback to be able to move forward, right? From a regulatory perspective, again, right, it's sort of what we do to do business in this space. So having that conversation with the FDA, getting a good regulatory or reimbursement consultant, if that's what it takes, right, to have those conversations. There have been people who have been operating in this space clearly for, ages. And so it's not novel, but being able to really think about how you move your novel idea through quickly, there's a lot of opportunities there. So I think it's really, one, talking to people who know things and who can help you through that. And then when you think about commercializing new innovations within the health and pharma space, it's, I think the stories that we tend to see in the media are really after folks have gone through a series of early inflection points already, right? So the unicorns are not built overnight, right? And I would argue also that in most cases outside of pharma, when you think about, unicorn status, that's generally not the typical pathway of a device company, of a diagnostics company, right? But there's immense value that can be created there as well, because you've got strategics in there. You've got this very robust network of folks who are really looking at what is the value that you're going to add, and then you can have an excellent exit, right? And I think they really want to make sure that you're building it appropriately from the ground up. So I would just say it's good to know how to navigate, but don't take shortcuts, because those can oftentimes, come back to you at a later stage. So
I had someone on my team that was trying to argue that instead of unicorns, we should be looking for narwhals. Still unique, but not as quite as crazy that's out there, but have good exits and are really robust, good, scalable businesses.
Yes, I like that. Absolutely. Yeah.
So another question that came in, and you touched on this specifically, Tracy, a little bit before, but are there areas in this sort of general space that you believe are being overlooked, that are currently ripe for disruption? And Dove, I'll come to you with that too. But Tracy, curious if there's anything beyond what you mentioned before.
Sure. So I will say a little bit here about why we invest in women's health. We don't actually define women's health as being reproductive health only, right? Because women are more than the reproductive organs, but women and men biologically, right, are different at the cellular level. So when you think about areas that impact women exclusively, right, like things like menopause or ovarian cancer or reproductive health, absolutely, or things that impact women disproportionately, like neurodegenerative disease or autoimmune disease, in which over 80% of the patients are women, and then things like cardiovascular disease, in which 50% of women with a heart attack are misdiagnosed because they don't exhibit classic, so male symptoms of a heart attack, right? So I think that there's significant opportunity here to really understand how we're treating patients in a personalized manner by going back and interrogating the data that we have on them, right? And, going back to my prior comment, right, about data, if you don't have the data, it's really hard to generate those insights. And so I think that when we build these robust data sets, when we think about being inclusive, but when we also think about really being thoughtful about how we stratify that data, and when we take a very personalized approach to it, then that's a significant opportunity, because there's so much that is not known. And from an NIH perspective, it's 11% of funding is going to women's health research, which is over 50% of the population, just as one example. So I think that for various reasons, right, people have inherent biases and they invest in things that they're comfortable with and they know better. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to look at areas that are a little bit more uncomfortable for you, and areas that, might kind of spark your interest, but are, but to be able to expand your horizons and to really ask the questions about why haven't people done something there. I think those are the opportunities that are going to really create significant value, as opposed to the ones that are a little bit, there's 10 people here and it's a really hot area. We tend to shy away from that a little bit, actually.
Right. Very interesting. Dove, what about you? Is there an area that you believe is overlooked or ripe for disruption?
I don't know if it's overlooked, but it definitely is ripe for disruption. I mean, the diagnostic space, I think more broadly, is not necessarily overlooked, but it definitely needs an overhaul. There are plenty of diseases out there that we are unable to pick up on early enough, whether it be through a direct biomarker or an indirect biomarker. So work going into ways of predictive medicine, and layering on top of just what's going on in precision medicine, I think it's probably going to have a major transformation in the upcoming years. Just coming from the Alzheimer's perspective and the therapeutic side, there are plenty of potential drugs out there. If you caught the neurodegeneration earlier on, could actually help the patient, at least slow the progression of the disease. That's just one of many examples, cancer being another, obviously. And then obviously, again, I'm going to be a little biased here because I am coming from the neuroscience perspective, but neuroscience more broadly, neurodegeneration, as we're becoming an older population, everyone's living longer. It's going to become a much more prevalent, I would say, disease set. And obviously has its own complications across the board. It's been a challenging area because the brain is a very tightly micro-regulated part of the body. But it definitely, I think the diagnostics portion, just to kind of loop things back, would be a big area to focus on, specifically elder care, dementia more broadly.
I love it. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left and like a doozy of a question. So I'll let either one of you choose this one. I think we only have time for one of you. The question is this: as Tracy stated, since we're not a homogeneous population, how do you see insurance companies managing or limiting more personalized diagnosis and therapeutics options? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I mean, I'll I'm probably not going to give you the answer that you're going to want to hear, so I'll take a stab at it, right? But when you think about payers and how they move in this space, right, these are enormous battleships of companies, right? So it's really hard for them to move quickly in response to, sort of point changes. And so we haven't been seeing them take a very reactive approach to this, right? They are absolutely watching and waiting, right? But I think, again, in a highly regulated space, they're covering, millions of lives. So we're not necessarily, I think, seeing, sort of a lot of reactivity there. But I think what we are seeing is, for example, in things like, genetic counseling, right? When we have an investment in a telegenetic counseling service called Genome Medical. And when you think about the opportunities there to really think about the impacts downstream on people's lives and what that data and what that knowledge does for their choices further on, I think that that's something that's really attractive to payers. But I think that when you think about outcomes, they're still trying to evaluate what the outcomes are, of specific opportunities here. So they are very attractive opportunities there to provide additional access to folks. But I wouldn't say that we're seeing that being managed differently from an indication standpoint.
Perfect. Well, I will thank you both. That was an awesome answer. This whole panel, I could keep going for a long time. Tracy, Dove, thank you so much for making the time to share your thoughts with us. I hope you have a great rest of the day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, so we've now seen from the hospital incubator side of things, from the venture capitalist side of things. Let's bring a few founders onto the stage here to get it from the entrepreneurial mindset. And I thought maybe what we could do is if each of you could just give, your elevator pitch, who you are and what your company does, and we'll kind of go around the horn. And Philip, I'll start with you.
Hi, my name is Philip, and I'm founder CEO of this company called Kit.com. We're an at-home health testing company. I do have a little video I can show of our product. I don't know if Shira has that video.
Welcome to Kit, state-of-the-art at-home health testing delivered to you. Kit provides you with the ability to complete the full yearly medical exam from the comfort of your own home without the need for a phlebotomist or lab visit. Our smartphone app provides step-by-step guidance throughout the user journey to make it simple and convenient. A blood pressure monitor is provided to measure systolic pressure, diastolic pressure, and pulse. A saliva kit is provided to detect smoking, substance abuse, and other risk factors. A scale is provided to measure a user's weight. A finger prick kit is provided to take a micro blood sample for testing all the common health markers, such as kidney, heart, and liver function, as well as diabetes, HIV, and other diseases. Components used are proven instruments trusted by healthcare professionals. A live agent is available 24/7 to help ensure a successful user experience. Kit is here to help make health testing a modern, simple, and convenient process. Partner with Kit today to help enhance your remote patient care strategy.
Yeah, so that's just a little bit about Kit. So we're really here to be an at-home health testing company for telehealth companies and for insurers. And we're trying to solve the problem now that telehealth is pretty ubiquitous. What's the point of telehealth if you still have to come into your clinic to do your lab and your vitals? So we provide an end-to-end solution in a single box for telehealth companies to make the visit truly remote.
Perfect. Shida, can we go to you?
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me here. I am Shalja Dixit. I am founder and CEO of Curio Digital Therapeutics. We are a digital platform focused on women's mental health across their life cycle. So all the way from adolescent to, fertility as women go through that journey, postpartum and pregnancy, menopause, perimenopause, and healthy aging. As you may know, 1 in 5 women in the United States alone suffer from mental health condition. But unfortunately, this is an area which is not looked at. We don't have the right kind of tools. Women from a physiological perspective behave differently when it comes to their mental health. There is a clear correlation between physiological, meaning hormone in their life cycle, and their mental health status. So that's what our focus is, to have digital tools that take care of affordable, scalable solution, taking care of the stigma and providing those solutions for women at home. I think you mentioned this. Our first product is Mama Lift, which is focused on postpartum for women who are during their pregnancy or after pregnancy suffering from mental health conditions. Happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Vasu, how about you? Can we get an elevator pitch on what you're doing? And we've got you on mute, I believe, too.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Fred. Yeah, so I'm Vasu, co-founder, CEO at Vital. Our mission, vision, sense of purpose is really oriented around reshaping care delivery to be more accessible, more proactive, by building diagnostics that meet patients where they are. So that could be the clinic, the home, and all the alternative sites of care that are emerging. Our first device is a desktop instrument that enables you to get all of your blood tests in 20 minutes at the doctor's office. So we built this incredibly easy to use platform that uses a cheap consumable and can run basically 60 lab tests in 20 minutes across hematology, clinical chemistry, and immunoassays. And we do this by combining amazing work across like microfluidics, optics, machine learning, and biochemistry. We're still a little stealthy, but we're producing data on a prototype system with real clinical samples across all of those types of tests. And yeah, excited to share more as we go forward.
You were definitely the definition of stealthy. I was trying to do some background research, and I was like, oh, this is all behind the scenes. But love what you guys were building once we got to dive into it a little bit. So let's do this. One of the things that came up in the previous panel is the challenges of startups and new technologies in what is a very regulated and legacy world. As a founder, how do you all see that challenge, and how are you overcoming it? Maybe we'll start. We'll go back around the horn one more time. Philip, we'll go with you to start.
Yeah, so definitely a lot of challenges for health startups. I think the great thing is kind of the we've kind of come front and center. So like health startups are really at the front and center these days with the how COVID has really affected things and changed the digital health into kind of the forefront of everyone's mind. But I think one of the big problems I see is that there are so many startups out there that it's just hard for, especially if you're selling to employers and you're selling to hospitals, like who do they pick, right? Like there's I think you guys mentioned at Venture Field there's like 1,000 startups started a day, and so how do you pick, right? How do you get the great ones to shine out? And I think that's honestly one of the biggest problems. And with that also interoperability. How do we have different startups be able to kind of be tried by these different institutions without a lot of headache? Because I think getting that pilot phase and getting past the contract, I think our biggest client took us 2 years to close the contract, right? And so it's not an easy process. And so how do you get your face in front of employers? That's a big problem. I think the other problem that I really see is how we're me and Vasu and Charlie as well, we're all kind of in the preventative health space, right? We want to make things that are good for people in the long term, but that doesn't necessarily align with incentives in the US, at least with how insurance companies work, right? Like insurance companies, they're not really they don't keep a patient long enough for a long-term screening to make sense for cancer, for example. They do it because they want their patients to be happy, but it doesn't really affect their actuarial outcomes because they switch insurance companies so often. So how do you get to that point where the long-term incentive of having preventative healthcare kind of aligns with what the organization wants, right? And their bottom line? I think that's really a much tougher problem than actually getting a startup out there. So those are the two big problems I see.
Super interesting. I might want to come back to the insurance part of it. But Shaya, on your side, how do you think about this?
Yeah, so I So, I think in the previous panel as well, as Philip said, healthcare has historically been slow to adapt things, right? Change does not, it's one of the industries which has been slowest to adopt many of things. And you can actually argue whether this is right or wrong. I think there are, when it comes to healthcare, you do want to take a little bit more time. So I won't say adoption being slower is necessarily a wrong thing, right? I mean, it's just the nature of the industry. The second thing is it is a highly regulated industry. Again, you can argue maybe not a bad thing, right? You want a third party, you want somebody like FDA to be looking at some of the aspects and data. Something was mentioned in the previous panel. I want to come back to that. I think one of the challenges in these two environments, you want to make sure it takes longer for healthcare startups to come to market and have a product because of these two reasons, right? One of the major reason is that you need to have the right kind of data. You need to have the right kind of evidence to demonstrate the proof, right, that this thing works, whatever that startup concept is. In our case, we have our platform, which is for management of mental health conditions. And it took us a long time to generate the data to convince, and we are at a point where we have a lot of data, we believe, where we are distinguishing ourselves from a lot of other just app, or appification of mental health tools that are out there. So I think that's the key. If you have the right kind of data, you understand that how this fits into the clinical workflow. We have been working with Mount Sinai and Dove, and and Evestria Ventures are investors. They invested in our concept, and we are very fortunate for that, because we align on the vision that you need to have evidence. You need to make sure that it aligns with the healthcare system too. Those things take time, unlike any other startup where you may have a product and you can get it out there without having a lot of data and evidence to understand it.
Very interesting. Vasu, same question to you. I mean, how do you accelerate, right, and launch this and break through with all the challenges that we all have been talking about?
Yeah, I think fundamentally at Vital, we always want to look at regulation as an opportunity. Like you kind of have to with diagnostics, given they're an inevitability and they're going to happen. So you want to integrate this into your strategy at a pretty fundamental level. I think the sort of particular short-term challenge in our space is post-COVID, or through COVID, the FDA has been really stuck getting through all that stuff, and so regulatory cycles have become longer and less deterministic, and just like more random in general. So I think figuring out how we come out of this is going to be important. On the other side, regulation is generally reimbursement, and it's sort of another layer that where reimbursement will lag cost pressure, inflationary pressure. And we have to figure out how to make the business still make a ton of sense in those environments too.
That's super interesting. And I love the sort of entrepreneurial hat of like the obstacle is the way, right? The obstacle is actually the advantage. And how do you take that knowing that exists and use it to your benefit? I think it's super smart. Curious from your guys' point of view, how do you scale, right? So as this, obviously it takes a long time to get through the regulation. You need to get the data to prove it. And then you have this moment of, okay, now how do we differentiate ourselves and go grow into whatever your aspirations might be? Curious that moment of like, okay, you break through, now how do you kind of pour the gas on? How are you all thinking about that? And Shaya, I'll start with you on that one.
Sure. So I think the first very important thing in our journey was making sure that in the ecosystem, we get all of the players and we engage them early on, right? So we have been working with Elementa Labs at Mount Sinai. So rather than just making something in our lab, actually working with the stakeholders who are going to be hopefully early adopters of your concept or innovation that's coming out. That I would say is extremely important. We have been working with some payers also, looking at their data very early on. So I would say rather than waiting for that moment that, okay, now it's ready for launch, make sure that you engage from the very early on. It takes time, it takes extra effort, but it's worth because you understand and you course correct early on. I think that's very important thing. And many of those turn into your early adopters, and that's how you launch. The second important thing is that rather than going out as a startup alone, which can be difficult, look for collaborations and a B2B model. That's what we are looking at. So we are looking at more of a B2B model where we are going through other channels and partnering with others as well. So those are two ways that we think scale up help. I still have a journey to travel, so I won't say that I have all the answers, and many of us are still figuring out. But I think that that's an approach we have taken. Yet to see like where we end up as we take this journey.
Yeah, I think as a founder, I had somebody tell me this the other day, is each time you pass a hurdle of some sort, it actually gets harder. You think like, oh, now it's going to get easier. It's like, no, it's like almost like baseball, right? Oh, now you're in the major leagues. Like the fastballs are faster than they were yesterday. But that's good. Those are the
just keep on listening and going back to drawing board if you have to tweak things, right? That's the approach you have to take.
I love it. Vasu, what about you on your side?
Yeah, I kind of look at it, there's two sides to the coin. There's technology and business model and distribution. So from a technology perspective, a lot of the pieces that enable our platform have really matured over the last 10 years, right? So we're leveraging things like camera sensors from companies like Samsung and Sony that have really mature supply chains, or leveraging molding techniques from supply chains that matured in the age of DVDs and Blu-rays that can now be leveraged to build really high precision next generation microfluidic devices. And we can kind of point to dozens of these sort of why nows from a technology perspective that we've been really thoughtful about leveraging as we think about where to place complexity in our system to enable our vision. From a market perspective, I apologize for sort of stating the obvious, but the move to capitation and value-based care is just driving this massive adoption of tools that drive better care journeys, especially at the point of care, lead to earlier diagnosed disease, close care gaps like the stuff that Philip's working on. The business case is just a lot clearer for technology like what we're building than in the pure fee-for-service world, where sort of the optimizations around how do I get people in and out as quickly as possible versus patient experience and capturing disease risk earlier. So there's a ton of evidence that points to giving clinicians superpowers in a way that makes economic sense, leads to the earlier diagnosis, better outcomes, lower total cost of care, things that we all care about eventually enabling. Just in the sense of capitation, right? We have 26 million people enrolled in a Medicare Advantage plan, 42% of the total Medicare population, growing 10% every year. Like those are numbers that generally don't happen in healthcare, 10% growth every year, other than on the cost side, right? So every provider, whether they're a health system, integrated delivery network, solo doctor, they're thinking about how to accelerate into this world of taking on risk. And it's clear because it's definitely the future of primary care. It's also a way, it just makes more economic sense long term. So those are all things that are tailwinds for us.
Philip, how do you think about that, the tailwind side, and how do you scale?
Yeah, so I think we're in the middle of trying to, scale to many different businesses right now. Like we sell to insurers, we sell to telehealth companies, sell to hospitals, and so I'm specifically going to talk more about scaling actually for our model, which is like an over mail box, and so everyone's kind of familiar with getting a box in the mail, so that part is pretty straightforward. But for us, as we've scaled, we've built our own warehouse in San Francisco that assembles all these kits, puts them together. We have our own lab, and so scaling that up is pretty horizontal actually as you kind of go out. So we are able to scale kind of like a internet-based model because mail is pretty much ubiquitous, right? There are obviously their own challenges with having a physical based startup. Like for example, right now there's a massive paper shortage across the globe due to what's happening in China, due to a lot of things like the paper mills in the U.S. are, all destroyed by what was previously coming overseas, but now like there's nothing coming from overseas, so all those paper mills are starting back up. So there's all these kind of like supply chain things, but I don't know if that's what we want to talk about right now. But like again, I think like just scaling up in terms of like just having a warehousing and an e-commerce based like model that seems to be working well for us. I think the other side is really around APIs. Like, I mean, how do you handle all these orders, right? And physicians making orders for kits and things like that. And so we've moved to like a pretty standards based like API, like a FHIR based API, which I think like a lot of healthcare companies are okay with working with, like FHIR and any kind of future based API. So moving to that, I think kind of helps you scale as well. So yeah, I think this is a front and center for us. So it's tough, but it's a different phase of the company. But I think it's a very interesting phase for sure.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I love the difference of all three of your answers. And Vasu, I think one thing that you touched on that jumped for me is this sort of like convergence of multiple technologies creates this moment of like, why now?
Mhm.
Right? Why is this the right time for you guys, and why didn't it exist before? And oftentimes people are like, oh, that's such a simple idea, right? The biggest ideas seem almost intuitive, and it's like, well, it wasn't simple 5 minutes ago because all these five things had to happen at the same time to now make the pieces go nicely. So let me switch gears. So you guys are in the throes of this. You might not feel like you're at the stage yet where you can give advice, but you are. So curious what advice you would give to early stage founders that are entering into this sort of health tech wellness ecosystem. And I'll start with Vasu and go back the other direction.
Yeah. Look, we're in a massive industry, and sort of everybody's gonna have an opinion on everything. I think cutting through the noise, really focusing on what providers and patients are excited about versus the experts in the field who are often gonna have the most pessimistic view is really important. So if you can get those folks excited, there's probably a way to get paid for it, and there's probably easier ways to get paid for it and harder ways to get paid for it. But you can find a path through it. So um, that's my best advice, other than never give up.
I love it. Shaya, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just take that thought further, what Vasu said. One is that if there is an unmet need, first recognize the unmet need, your solution is providing, believe in it with conviction, be ready to longer journey. There are no shortcuts, right? Especially in healthcare, you need evidence, you need to have a proof of concept that this thing, your startup, your idea does work. Make sure you engage stakeholders, be resilient, and be ready to hear many no's before a yes comes. So but if you believe in the idea and you have the right data, and you have recognized the unmet need, it will work. It just takes time.
Perfect. Philip, what about yourself?
I think yeah, for the new founders trying to enter this space, I'm approaching from the B2B standpoint, kind of like how Charlie is approaching this. But I think one of the things I found that was, if I could look back, is don't underestimate how long it takes to sign a contract. Like you may have a product that everyone loves, and like they fall in love with your product. They say this is amazing, but if they're a big corporation, it may take you 2 years to sign this contract, right? And like you're just gonna be, burning money for those 2 years. And so like how do you keep yourself lean until you get those big sales, or do you go with smaller companies and get smaller sales? Like I think that's one of the big things for me is like how do you outlast how do you get through your keep your use your money wisely so you can stay alive while you're trying to get those initial sales, even if you have a great product, which you have to start with already, right? Which I think everyone here has an amazing product. It's like how do you just stay alive in that case? um I think the second one I have is really like I feel like I've talked to a lot of advisors in different markets, and finding ones that give you honest feedback, and they may not be like positive feedback. It may be just like really blunt, like negative feedback. As long as it's coming from a good place. There's also those types of people that just give you negative feedback and are not great to hang out with. But like the people that give you honest feedback that's constructive, I think those have been way more helpful than people just trying to be nice. So having those type of feedback is great. And then finally, I really think getting your name out there by going to a lot of these programs like Venture Fuel. We were part of Johnson and Johnson and Johnson and Johnson's incubator, and Plug and Play's incubator for insurance, and On Deck's incubator, and EHAR for employers. Right, you have to like hit up all the different programs, all the different conferences if you're in the B2B space, and it's a lot of work. You might want to just have a separate person that helps you just to do that, but it's a lot of work. So I wouldn't underestimate. Don't just focus on the product. A lot of health is just selling, right? And so that's important.
I love it. I mean, I think grit, resilience, don't give up, right? Is one sort of common theme there. The other is make sure your advisors are just, right? There's a lot of noise, to your point, Vasu, out there. And so making sure that you trust who's advising you, but also that you don't need people that are just telling you yes to cut through it. And I think really the idea of collaboration came through a lot today. The idea of finding potential customers, making them partners in some way, enabling both parties to learn from something is there. And lastly, Philip, on like runway and cash maintenance, it truly is one of the things that we but we share with founders a lot is, hey, like payment terms sometimes are 120 days after it's contracted, which by the way is going to take you 120 days, which means the deal you're working on could be 9 months, a year plus, right? So it's very easy to have it in the sales pipeline and think it's happening soon. And so just being very eyes wide open, and goes back to the obstacle is the way, right? That is the world we live in. Those are the regulations. And sometimes when you collaborate and make them partners, you can get paid faster and find different ways to make it work. But anyway, thank you all so much. This has been incredibly insightful. We're so excited about each of your companies, your products. We wish you continued success. Hope we can be helpful in that growth as well. And to everybody that tuned in today, if you'd like to find out any more information on any of these companies, you can go to any of the Venture Fuel social channels, Venture Fuel at LinkedIn. Wherever you're listening now, you should be able to see lots of information linking to their social handles. And thank you all for tuning in. We hope it was interesting. Would love to hear from you, and hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.